Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and today I decided to bring this in-depth tutorial where I'm going to be teaching you guys everything I believe you need to know in order to be using the React Query library for fetching data in your React applications. Like I've said many times in the past, this is my favorite solution for fetching data in React. And I feel like there aren't a lot of videos on YouTube right now where people get in-depth explanations of all the different use cases in which React Query might trump all of the other fetching libraries. So that's my plan for today's video. If you're interested in just seeing some parts of it, you can obviously use the chapters I put down below and jump to whatever part of the video you are interested in. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Before we get into the video, if you could leave a like and subscribe, I would massively appreciate it. It will help push my videos to more people, and I would be extremely grateful if you could do so. So with that in mind, let's get into the tutorial. Okay everyone, so the first thing I would need to teach you guys is how to install the library. I have here a very simple React application, as you guys can see, and it currently doesn't have it installed, so I'm just gonna open up over here the terminal, and I'm gonna run yarn add at Tanstack / React Query. So this is the library we're going to be installing. Previously, it used to be called React Query a while ago, like just React Query, and that's what you had to install. But now it has the little at Tanstack. So that's something I've seen a lot of people actually getting confused because of old videos. But as you can see, we just installed the library. I'm going to delete a bunch of the stuff from here just so I don't have to deal with it. This is what comes with the boilerplate code from Create React App. But yeah, so what we need to do is we need to first tell React that we're going to be using React Query. The reason for that is because React Query is not only a data fetching solution, but also a state management solution. In my opinion, you can very easily use React Query as a replacement for stuff like Sustand and Redux. It has a very, very nice support for handling and changing the state of your application through the data you're fetching. So we need to tell our app that in certain parts of it, it's going to have access to all of that data that is shared across your application. Just like if you were using the context API and you needed a provider to determine where in your app you would get that data, we need to do the same thing with React Query. So what I need to do is get the entry point of our application, which is the index.js file over here where we render our app component. And I'm gonna pass in a provider from React Query. So to do that, we need to instantiate a query client. And a query client is something we can get right over here from, I'm gonna import from the library we just installed at Tanstack React Query. And I need to import three things. First, the query client, then the query client provider. And actually, I'll just import two for this one because I'll use the useQuery hook on the other component. But yeah, for now, we'll just have this two. So the query client, like I said, is us just instantiating like a version of React Query in our app. And we're telling React that wherever we pass this query client is where we will have access to the cache of React Query. So that's all information that we're going to deal with later, and I'm going to teach you guys everything, obviously. But just know that you should put this however up in your component tree as you can, because we will want to have access to all of the data everywhere. So might as well just put it in the highest part, right? So for now, we just create it like this. We're not even going to fill anything in this object. Then we also need to use the provider. So what I want to do is I want to pass in the query client provider over here and just wrap all of our app around with this. But obviously, since we're passing a provider, we need to pass in the client over here. And the client is the query client we just created. So now this should be working. This was us just telling React that we're going to be using React Query. Now we have to actually use it. And for that, I'm going to be using an online fake API that uses JSON called JSON placeholder. It's really cool if you're testing stuff. This is the link to it. this is what we're going to be fetching. We're going to be fetching fake to-do data as an example for this video. So if you're interested, just go ahead and go to this website as well. So what we want to do is, I'm going to comment this out because obviously we don't want to just put it there. I want to import from Tanstack React Query the useQuery hook. Now the useQuery hook is whenever we're going to fetch data, whenever we make a GET request, this is what we use. It will get data from an API and it will handle all the things related to fetching data for you. So normally, if you're just using, I don't know, XUse or the fetch API and you put it inside of a use effect, you would have to manually create states for the data, the error, the status of it, if it's loading or not, all of that kind of stuff. For this case, useQuery hook does all of that for you, and you don't even have to create or use the use effect hook. So we're gonna just create an example over here so you guys can see. So I'll just say const, I'll open and close curly braces, set equal, and pass in the useQuery hook. Now inside of here, we have to put a couple things. So the first thing will be a bit confusing in the start, but it will make a lot of sense when we start dealing with the cache stuff. So query key is basically, every time we have a query, we need to specify a query key, a unique query key that will distinguish it from all the other queries we have in our app. The reason for that is because when we're dealing with cache and we make some changes to our data and we manually, change the cache, we want to change that data in all of the other queries that are querying this specific data. So in order to do that, we basically pass in the same query key to all of them, and React Query will know that if one of them have any change, then we want the change to occur on all of the other ones as well. So we're going to come over here and we're going to give it a query key of to do. The reason why it's an array is because you can actually pass in multiple query keys. And that's more obviously when you start working with more data that interact with each other. And there's a lot of use cases as well. So now the only other thing we need to pass here is the query function. Now, this is where a lot of people get confused because React Query is not an alternative for something like XUse or the Fetch API, because XUse and the Fetch API, its main purpose is to fetch the data, is to directly just get the data, make the request to the API and get the data. What React Query does is it basically handles all of the other things that you should do after getting the data, which is actually way more than you would imagine. So we still have to fetch the data either using XUse or the Fetch API. I'm going to just use the Fetch API because I stopped using XUse. I feel like the Fetch API is way simpler, and it doesn't increase size in our bundle. So to use the Fetch API for this, we're just going to say fetch over here. We're going to put in the URL of our API, which I grabbed it from here. And then I'm going to say .then to handle the promise. I'm going to say res to get the response, and I'm going to turn the response into a JSON. So what we're doing here is we're basically in this function, we need to return a JSON with the result of this, including the errors, including the data in itself, including everything. We're going to return all of this from this function. And right now, when we fetch the data, it first isn't actually converted into JSON. So that's why we then convert it into JSON, so that in the end, we return all of this into the use query. Now, what can we do? Well, we can first grab the data directly from here. And you saw that there were some autocomplete because there's actually a lot of things you can get from the use query. And you should look at the documentation to see all of the use cases. I'm going to show you guys some of the most important ones. So we can grab the data, right? And the data specifically, I'm going to show you guys over here how this data looks like. As you can see, it looks like this. It has a user ID, an ID, a title, and a completed, right? Because it's a to-do task and it is an array. So what we want to do is we want to come over here and we want to loop through this data because the data will be an actual array like we just saw. So I'm going to loop through it by saying data.map. We're going to get the to-do info from here. So to-do, and we're just going to return a div with a couple pieces of information, right? We can more specifically just pass in both the to-do.id just to take a look at it. So I'll say h1 and I'll pass in the to-do ID. So ID equal to this. And let's also try to get the title. So title to do.title. And you can already see from the background that it is actually working, right? We're getting both of them. Oh, did I write it wrong? Did I write it with, yeah, title. But yeah, we're getting everything directly, and everything is bolded and massive. Wait, I'll just zoom out actually. But yeah, we're getting all of the data. So that's the most basic thing we can do. But we can also do a lot more. We can get the state of possible errors like this. And what would you want to do if you have an error? Well, you might want to check first to see if there's any errors, and then return maybe like a div with an error message, something like there was an error. Now, if any error occurs, this is what is going to be displayed. There is also another one, which is the state of loading. So you can get a is loading, it's a Boolean. So you can actually come over here and say if is loading, then return, I don't know, a spinner or something saying like data is loading, something like this. You guys will see that every time I refresh the page now, for a brief second, it shows data is loading over here. Obviously, you can make it look better however you want, but it was really simple. We didn't have to create all the different states. Everything is handled over here. And in its core, this is the most basic thing that React Query can do. Now, I want to show you guys how to do the other part of data fetching, which is actually altering data through what is known as a mutation. So there is a hook for mutating data called the useMutation hook. I'm going to bring it over here as well. And in order to test the useMutation hook, we're actually going to be using a different set of data from the same API. It's actually data related to like posts. And the reason why we're going to do that is because this is the only one that they allow me to also make post requests, which is something we're going to be doing with the mutation. But yeah, that's basically it. I'm just going to replace this with posts. And since it kind of looks the same, I don't think it would change that much. The two things are pretty similar, but yeah, the only difference is that it also includes a body. So I'm actually going to change this to like an H, I don't know, 4, and I'll put a body as well, like a p tag with to do dot body, just like this. And we can see over here that this is how the posts look. Now, with this, we can actually add posts to this thing. So what I want to do is I technically just want to have a button, because since this is not, I'm not building the website for like completely, we're going to be faking the data, obviously. So the button over here is, I want to add a post. So we're not going to actually get user input through creating inputs. We're just going to hard code the data into the request. So what we can do is we can grab the useMutation hook over here, and I'll actually go below the useQuery, and we can open and close and say useMutation, just like this. Now, similar to the useQuery, we're going to open up this, and instead of putting a mutation key for now, we're going to put a mutation function. And here, what I want to do is I want to basically say that whenever we call this function, we need to pass in some arguments to it. Why is that? Well, because when we fetch the data, we don't need any arguments unless we're fetching by ID or something like that. With mutating, we specifically need to add some data and send it through the body. So I'm gonna grab over here the new post we're gonna add, and whenever we call this mutation, it's gonna use that we have to pass this as the argument to a function. And as the opposite over here, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to just say fetch, then pass in the same URL, and I'm going to specify the method of which we're going to be making this request. The method will be the post, right? So I'm going to say method and then post like this, and then we need to pass in the body, and the body will be basically a JSON.stringify version of so I'll say stringify of the new post we're going to be passing as an argument, right? This is going to be an object containing all of the data. And then we want to just say dot, then grab the response again and say res.json, just like we did before. We're going to save this, and hopefully it works. Now, what do we get back from this useMutation? Well, we get back, first of all, a function called the mutate function, right? And this is the function we're gonna call with our new post data. So over here on the add post, I wanna say on click, whenever there's a click, we want to mutate, and we'll pass in over here an object containing the data. So since the data of a body of a post is like this, I'm just gonna copy this over here and paste it here. And here it is. We can fake some data. I'm gonna say that the user ID of this is, I don't know, 5,000, just so it doesn't interfere. And the ID is 4,000. The title of this post will be, hey, my name is Pedro, and this is my channel, just so we can differentiate them. And then the body is, this is the body of this post. I don't know, something like that. Then I'm gonna save this, and let's check to see if it works. But before we check, we're gonna get some information about the mutation. Just in case it fails, I can also demonstrate to you guys how exactly to handle those errors. So with the mutation, you can also get some information about if the mutation is loading and if there was an error, if it was success, anything. So one thing we can do is we can grab the is pending, which is similar to the is loading. We can also get the is error and also the is success. So what I can do is I can technically come over here and say that if there was any errors, similar to this one, I'm going to say if there was an error or there was an is error from the mutation, then we want to say that there was an error. Similar to this, we're going to say the data is pending. Actually, I'm not going to do anything with the data is pending other than maybe just say like, I don't know, if it's pending. Actually, I'll put it up here. I'll say if it's pending. I just want to see something right at the top saying, maybe a text saying data is being added, something like this. And then I'll wrap this around with curly braces and just say is pending is true. If that's true, then I want to show this. So that's all we can do for now. I can also use the is success, but it isn't that important for now. But let's test to see if this works. I'm going to open up the network tab so we can take a look to see if the post requests are actually done. Because one thing is that this specific API, although I'm going to be adding something and making a post request, the data isn't actually added to this list over here. We're going to have to add it to the cache, which is part of the tutorial later on. But it does give us a successful request, right? So this is the query one that we made. Now let's click on add post, and we should see that there was a correct request as well. As you can see, it says it was created. This is the data that we sent in the request, which correlates to what we did. And it seems like the response was an ID for it. And I guess since it was a successful one, it means it was created. Now, if we actually want to see the correct data being displayed here, like with everything that we added, maybe I think we just have to add some headers to this. Like I can come over here and add headers and then just say that the content type is equal to probably like application/JSON, charset, UTF-8. Maybe just adding this will actually make it work. Why is it? Oh, I have to do this. Let's see if we get back the whole request. Yeah, that worked. So we get back over here the data that we sent, and it was a successful request. So this is how mutations work. And that's, again, the second big part of what React Query does. But now it's when we get into the cool stuff, which is all the caching stuff, all the individual functions and variables that we can get related to our data that you have no idea about. This is where we're going to be talking about it. So in order to go ahead from this tutorial, I just need to give you a very brief explanation of what the cache is. So whenever you have a website, there is obviously data that is stored in databases and such, but there's also readily accessible and quick data probably inside of your memory related to things that is happening in your website. Now, when we're using React Query, they have their own cache management system, and they store all the data from the queries that we make in our application inside of there. And we can, instead of fetching again for data, we can sometimes just use the data from the cache. That will save us costs in making requests to an API, and it will just keep using the data that is in the cache. And if we need to update that data, we can either do it manually or have some sort of automation for it. So what I want to introduce you guys is to the idea of invalidating query. It's very simple. Basically, instead of manually altering our cache, we can mark queries as stale and potentially refetch them. Now, in this case specifically, it will refetch the data, and I'll show you guys exactly what it does. So in the useMutation hook, we can actually get something else over here at the bottom below the mutation function called an onSuccess. So there's an onError, an onMutate, an onSettled, and an onSuccess. Obviously, the onError is a function that you might call if there was an error. The onMutate is if the data was mutated, or if there was basically called. The onSettled, I'm honestly not sure. I've never seen it. Probably when the whole thing is done. That's what it means probably. And onSuccess is obviously a function that you can call whenever the mutation was successful. And I want to basically say that whenever this specific mutation is done, I want to grab the query client that we don't have access here. We only have access in the index.js, but I'll show you guys how to get it. We have it over here where we created it. But we're going to say query client dot invalidate queries, just like this. Whenever we call this, it will basically tell whatever query we invalidate over here to refetch its data. So let's first get the query client, which we don't have. To do that, it's actually not that hard. There's a hook for getting the query client. So use query client, and we can directly just get it from, I don't know, up here. I'll just say const query client. No, I keep pressing the L, but yeah, query client is equal to use query client. Now we can use this over here at the bottom. And in order to invalidate a query, we have to specify which query we want to invalidate. And that's where the query keys that I mentioned before come into place. We can pass over here that we want to invalidate all the queries with the query key equal to posts, which, by the way, I didn't change when I changed the API we're working on, but we have to put posts. Now it's given us an error because it's saying query client is not defined, because I need to change this to lowercase q to match the variable. But yeah, so what we're telling here is to refetch the post data when the mutation is successful. Because then if we are actually using a website with a real API where you can add data to it, we would want to maybe fetch the data again to see the new result appearing. So we can test this out. I'm going to open the network tab. You guys will see that so far there's only one query, right? But now I'm going to click add posts, and you'll see that now two queries happen, two fetch requests. One is to mutate the data and it is returned, and the second one is to refetch the data in order for us to have it updated, right? Now that isn't specifically related to the cache, especially because in this API we're working on, it doesn't matter what kind of data we add, it's never going to be added here because they don't allow me to add. It's all fake, but we know the mutation is working because the request responded with a 201, which means it was successful. But although this is really cool, it does refetch the data, right? So there's ways for us to actually manually edit the data in the cache and display that data inside of our website, right? So instead of refetching the data, what we're going to do is we're going to come over here, and we're not going to tell query client to invalidate this query. And we're going to tell the query client to set the query data equal to, and then over here we have to pass in two things. The first thing is we need to pass in a list, or the list of query keys that we want to actually edit the cache with. So I'm going to do posts over here because this is the query that we want to edit, right? And then what we get over here is a function And this callback function is similar to how when you have a reduce or a filter or any of those primitive JavaScript functions that you can use, you basically get some data related to how the state of this is right now, and we can call this ode posts, and you have to return the state of it after. So you can't mutate the data directly, you have to return how this data is going to look after the changes are done. So if we think about it, the posts query returns a list of posts. So we can get the old posts from here, and we can also get the return from this request directly from this. And we know from the video so far that we'll get in like just the post that we try adding directly. So we get it through new post. And we can just return the old posts. So all of the old posts before plus the new post that we're adding. And you can see that now, instead of just having like fetching the data, you'll see that I'll inspect element over here. I'll go to the network tab and I'll refresh the page. We'll have the first query, right? But then we're going to click on add post and we only have one, which is fine because we're not invalidating the query. But the difference here is that we manually edited the cache of that query. So that means that now if we go down there, we should see an extra item with information that we created. And that's exactly what we see. Now, if we were to refresh this, you should see that as I go downstairs, the thing is not there anymore. Because technically, we didn't edit the data that was created, right? We didn't make a change in the database. We just edited the cache that is in our current memory. Now, as we start working with cache, we have to understand things related to the state of the data you're fetching. And there's a lot to be said about that. So the whole purpose of the cache is we want to have stuff being the most up-to-date possible, but also minimizing the amount of requests we make. But at the same time, that is not always possible because what we're doing here by editing directly the cache is fine. But in a lot of cases, doing this optimistically is not a good idea. Sometimes making that extra refetch is important in order to maintain accuracy with the data. So we can do a lot of things in React Query to make sure that we are constantly up to date with the data. And one of the things that I think is the most useful is determining the stale time of a request. So what exactly is the stale time and how does it differ from something like the cache time, which is a concept that I will introduce as well. Well, the stale time, if I come over here to our useQuery, there's a lot more that we can actually add to this query. So we obviously added the query function, but we can also add the stale time over here. And the stale time is in milliseconds, the length of the time you are accepting this query to be as it is. So if we have some sort of data that is constantly changing or that even changes after, 60 seconds, and we want to just check to see if the data is up to date, well, we can add a certain number over here. For example, let's use that 60-second example for this. 60 seconds in milliseconds is 60 with 3 zeros at the end, right? This is around 60 seconds. So what this will do is it will actually, if there's no changes in this query in 60 seconds, it will refetch the data automatically. Now, for the purposes of this example, I'll actually decrease this to 6 seconds because I'm not gonna wait for 60 seconds just to show this to you guys. Actually, I can make it shorter. I'll make 4 seconds, something like that. But this isn't actually enough to make this refetch, and I'll explain to you why. When we set a stale time, I know I said it would refetch automatically, but with only one condition, which is becoming stale. Making a query become stale doesn't necessarily mean it will request again. But there are certain actions that will make it request again. So stale queries are refetched automatically in the background when the following things happen. First of all, when a new instance of the query is mounted, or when the window is refocused, when the network is reconnected, and when the query is optionally configured such that it has a refetch interval, which is something I'm going to show you guys. Specifically, an example we can test here is switching tabs, because when we switch tabs, we are refocusing on the window. And you can see that after 3 seconds, the new thing was fetched. And I can try again and again, but it won't because it hasn't been 3 seconds. Now it has been, so we can come back. You see what I mean, right? This is one of the actions that can make this happen. But if you also want to add a refetch interval instead of a still time, that will actually make that initial behavior that I said, which is every 4 seconds, it will refetch the data. So let's try this out. I'll refresh this. We have here the posts. We wait 4 seconds and it fetches again. Wait 4 seconds and it will fetch again. So this is really great for kind of data that isn't exactly specific. I don't know, you can use it for like every 1 second if you want to do that, but you can also use it for refetching every 10 minutes, something like that, if you have that kind of data. Now you can also set up a default stale time for all queries if you're interested in that. And the way you do that is you go to actually where we defined our query client, and now you can actually add some default options to here, which is something that applies to every query or every mutation. To specify the default options for the queries, we just say queries like this, and we can add a stale time here, such as, 6,000, or actually I'll put 60,000, which is 60 seconds. And this will apply to every single one of them. Now, if you recall, when I was explaining stale time, I mentioned that there's another concept which you might get confused with because it's very similar to stale time, and a lot of people do get confused between the two. And it's actually a concept that changed its name, which causes even more confusions, which is the idea of the cache time or the garbage collection time. So previously, you could set something, for example, over here, like this. You could say cache time and set an interval to 6,000. Now, instead of calling it cache time, you put GC time, which means garbage collection time, which honestly makes more sense. And that's the previous name caused most of the confusion. Because what this is if I were to set this query to have a garbage collection time of 6,000, so basically whenever the query is unmounted and it's no longer being used, since there are no more active instances of this query, the time you put over here will be kind of a timeout set for when React Query will delete and garbage collect the query. So it's just a way for us to not keep unnecessary data in our cache. So what I would recommend is, first of all, not setting this individually for each query, but again, setting it over here as a default option and setting the garbage collection time to around double from what you have as your stale time, if you have anything over here. By default, it's 5 minutes, but I'm gonna put 10 minutes. The way I'm gonna do that is I'm actually gonna put 10. Then we need to multiply this, the amount of minutes, times 60 seconds, which we all know it's 6,000, or 60 times 1,000. And this becomes 10 minutes. I'd recommend putting the garbage collection time as more than the stale time. That's just how I think it works better. Maybe you can also just use the default option initially, but obviously adapt to whatever case you need. Now, there's some other things I wanted to touch upon. The idea of parallel queries is something that I haven't said, but it's implied, I believe. You can have multiple queries at the same time. Imagine this is querying something else. It has a different ID. You can make all of them at the same time and just use different variables. There's also dependent queries as opposed to parallel queries, which basically are two queries that depend on each other. I don't have the API. I don't have examples I can use with the API, but let's imagine something like this. This query is querying data, right? I'm going to delete all of this. Now imagine that this over here is getting, one post specifically, right? It's just getting information about a post. And this over here would include data about that post, like a data.id, right? And this query over here needed that ID in order to fetch information about something, right? So I could get the ID from this data like this, saying data.id directly like this. And then I can actually add a thing over here called enabled. And this enabled option over here basically says that this query will only execute as long as whatever Boolean operation you put over here is true. So whenever the ID is not null and also true, we put 2 exclamation points to make this, convert this into a Boolean, then this will execute. So basically, if you have a query that depends on the other, just make the first query first, get the data, and add that data as part of the enabled, because then whenever you get that data, this query will execute. So that's kind of the idea of dependent queries. Now, one cool thing you can also do is the idea of a refetch on window focus, right? We already have that set as true by default. You remember if we set the stale time, right, as like, I don't know, 3 seconds, and we were to wait 3 seconds and keep like switch after 3 seconds and the thing becomes stale, it will refetch, right? But we can remove focusing on the window as a possibility to cause that refetch by coming over here and saying refetch on window focus equals to false. So I can come over here and now even if it passes 4 seconds, which is the stale time, it won't activate the post. As you can see, it is not refetching because we set that as not a possibility. Now, let's imagine you want to, I don't know, like this query is prone for erroring, but you really want to keep trying to make it work. You can actually put a retry option over here. The retry option is basically you put over here a number and it will try this amount of times to make this request before it accepts failure. So if we were to test this, I can make this query definitely fail, refresh this page, and you'll see it failed, but it will keep trying for 5 times until it gives up. See, one more time, it's taking a bit, and yeah, just the last one until it's still data is loading, right? But it keeps trying. I don't know how long. Yeah, the last one definitely failed, so there will be no more attempts. So this is a really cool thing, especially if you're working with things with data that may require a retry. Not always you'll have it first try, right? Not always there's stuff can happen, but maybe putting the retries to 2 or 3 might make sense in your use case. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, and again, if you guys want more things about React Query than I've put on this video, I can definitely make one. Thinking of making a video on teaching you guys how to paginate and use the useInfinite query hook that allows you to basically fetch data by scrolling down on your page and stuff like that. I'm thinking of making a video for that, but if you guys want to see more about React Query, I can definitely do that. However, the last thing I want to talk to you guys in this video is just give you guys some advice on possible bugs. The main bug I see people dealing with is, oh, why is my cache not working? Well, maybe it is not working because you didn't create your index.js, your query client, outside of your components. So if I were to come over here, grab this and put it inside of this, what do you think would happen? Obviously, it's failing right now because this I need to play around with it, but you get the gist, right? If I were to pull this here and do this, why would this not work? Well, because the query client is what holds everything related to our application's React Query instance, right? Including the cache. So if we were to put it inside of the app, every time this app component re-renders, we will create a new query client, which means that every time the app component re-renders, we would create a new cache storage, thus making all of the cache changes we currently have be useless. So definitely make sure you put this over here and not over here. Now, there's a lot more to this. I would recommend, if you're for best practices purposes, I recommend instead of making your query functions like this, directly like this, I recommend creating it outside or in a different file, maybe something like get posts and then making the function, something like this, and then directly putting it over here. Where is it? Putting it like over here. And I recommend doing this because I feel like it gets more organized. Then you don't have a bunch of functions just randomly inside of your component. You can separate this into a different file, makes it look a lot better. And in situations like this one, where the mutation is a big thing because you have to include the body, the headers, everything, it looks even better if you were to grab all of this and just put it somewhere else, right? So yeah, that's pretty much it. If you guys enjoyed this video, please leave a like down below if you want to see more. I'm gonna post this code and put it in the description, just if in case you want to play around with it, but I would recommend just doing it on your own. I appreciate you guys watching this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like. As I said, I'm really grateful that I'm back making videos. I'm excited. First week, I'm posting 2 videos in a long time, so really happy for that. And stay tuned because a lot more is coming. So yeah, that's basically it. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I see you guys next time.